Hello, and welcome to our community conversation series with Safe Harbor of Sheboygan County. My name is Patrick, and my role with Safe Harbor is in prevention education. Our goals with this series are focused on creating a greater understanding about community agencies that victim survivors of sexual assault may first report to, along with gaining clarity regarding the roles of those agencies, the mechanisms of their support, and the resources available through those agencies. This series is also focused on creating more awareness surrounding the options available to victims and survivors so they're able to make a more informed decision about how they wish to navigate community resources. Today I'm joined by Leslie, a sexual assault specialist with Safe Harbor. Leslie, welcome, and could you begin by introducing yourself and speaking to what your role and responsibilities are as a sexual assault specialist with Safe Harbor of Sheboygan County?
Yeah, hi, thank you for having me. So I'm Leslie, and I am one of two sexual assault specialists with Sheboygan Safe Harbor. Our roles have a lot of different prongs to them. So a lot of that is one-on-one support for victim survivors of sexual assault at different points in the process. And then a large majority of that is also working on accompaniments at the hospital with the police department. And then just being there as part of the hotline services. So we hold a lot of different roles.
Nice, thank you. So you spoke a little bit about Safe Harbor's role. I'm wondering if you could kind of speak maybe a little bit more about the services that we provide and how we can help support victim survivors of sexual assault.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big part of what we do with sexual assault survivors is that advocacy that can look like a bunch of different things. We're there to support, to make sure that the victims' rights are being upheld, that victims, survivors are aware of all of their options that they have throughout the process. And those are conducted at Sheboygan Memorial Hospital for our SAAM, which is a sexual assault nurse examiner. So when somebody has been assaulted within the 72-hour time period after that, they can go to Aurora and have that SAAM exam, and we're there to support them through that. Another place that we can do that accompaniment is with the police departments, and that's all the police departments in Sheboygan County. And again, it's just to be there to support and make sure that they know all their options, that they're being heard. Our police departments do a pretty good job, but it's nice to have that advocate there as a friendly face, because being in the police department can be a little bit scary sometimes. And then another one is at the Child Advocacy Center. So that would obviously be for our youth victims. And we're there to advocate as well, to make sure not only the child is supported, but to make sure the parents are supported as well. And then finally, we do court accompaniments, and that would be at any of the various meetings within the court system. So whether that be like a trial meeting or whether you're getting ready for court hearing that's about to go to trial, we're there to support during those meetings and then also during the court trials themselves.
Great, yeah, thank you. So I have a couple of follow-up questions to that. So you had mentioned accompaniments and connecting with victim survivors at the hospital, law enforcement agencies, and at the CAC, the Child Advocacy Center. Can you tell me more about sort of those accompaniments? You mentioned like the 72 hours, for example, and what is the role of advocates? I know that you spoke to the support element, but can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so as advocates, we kind of have a special place in the system because we're not part of the legal part of the system. We're just there to make sure all of the parts are going correctly for somebody. And so we have some confidentiality stuff that other agencies might not have, and our role looks a little different because we don't have a goal other than supporting these victim survivors. So what that looks like is us being able to go in there before any process starts and being able to explain to victim survivors what that process is going to look like, what their options are, if it's something that they have to do or if they have a choice not to do it. Making sure, like at the hospital, you know, sometimes our victims are coming in and they haven't eaten. So being able to get them like those necessities, that is also something that we provide. but just there really as that support rather than being part of the system stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. In thinking about ongoing services, what does that maybe look like?
So ongoing services can look a couple of different ways. For our program specifically, we work with victims at any point in their recovery, their healing. So that can be people who are fresh into it and it's just happened and they're kind of in that crisis zone. And then it's really just kind of teaching different ways to stay calm, doing breathing, those kinds of things, talking through like how they're feeling about things, the dynamics of sexual assault and how people can feel during that because it's different for everybody. And so normalizing some of those feelings they might be having, all the way to people who maybe have been assaulted as a child and they're in their adulthood now and they're kind of just having triggers and starting to deal with that. So working, in that past tense part, where it's just kind of affecting their life now and they're wanting to deal with that. And so we're working with them. We kind of have a dual road kind of program where part of the time we're going to be like delving into the sexual assault stuff, really talking about how that's affected somebody, triggers, working through like how they can take care of themselves. And then sometimes that can be a little much, right? And so we don't want to overwhelm people. And so then in addition to that, we're working on life skills and other things that can help them just kind of normalize life again.
Yeah, thank you. Understanding that Safe Harbor provides legal advocacy, how is Safe Harbor able to maybe support a victim survivor in obtaining a restraining order or navigating the legal system?
Yeah, so restraining orders are a huge thing. It's a matter of safety. And one of the things that we focus on here is making sure that our clients feel as safe as possible. So we're constantly doing that safety planning. And one of the things that usually comes up is working on those restraining orders. Now, sometimes in the legal system, if somebody's been arrested, if this is a more recent thing and somebody's being arrested, there's going to be conditions of their bond that will prevent them from having access to the victim, in which case it doesn't really make sense to do a restraining order because they overlap each other then, where that bond will do the same thing as a restraining order, but sometimes they're not on a bond, and so getting that restraining order makes sense. So we have a legal advocate who can do all of that paperwork with them and help that filed and talk about what that looks like and the safety that that provides them. Some of our advocates that work on the day shift and the night shift are also skilled in doing restraining orders as well. And so there's options for time availability with people to be able to do those restraining orders. And then accompanying somebody to that restraining order, because that can be a
Sure.
scary situation for somebody to be in that courtroom and to have to talk. That other person may show up and then there's a buffer there for them so they feel more comfortable.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. In thinking about marginalized populations and knowing that they are likely to have a higher victimization rate along with a lower reporting rate, how does Safe Harbor approach working with victim survivors of marginalized populations and communities who may not be as trusting of systems or agencies?
Yeah, well, this is a place that we can always grow more in, right? We live in a society where that hasn't been the focus, and so there's always more work to do. We're very much focused on that and trying to do all the things that we can to better serve that population. On staff, we have 2 Southeast Asian advocates who are bilingual and who can help and really understand that cultural aspect of it. And then they do training to all of us as well so that we can understand, so that when we're talking to somebody, we have a part of that as well. And then we also have a Hispanic advocate, and same thing, dealing with that culture piece and the language piece. So somebody that specifically has that knowledge that's internal that we can reach to when we have somebody that we're working at, but that can also be that direct service person as well, that gives them that comfort level. And then as far as other marginalized communities, when we're talking about the LGBTQAII and the African American population, we don't have specific advocates for that, but we go through a significant amount of training because we're all sitting here with our white bias, right? Our privileged bias. And so, we work really hard to identify that and try to put the right things out into the world, into a world where the right things aren't happening. So it's very much a focus and something that we're always looking at, and always, always, always happy to get feedback about what we could be doing better. And so, yeah, we have a lot of focus on it, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that perspective. When someone reports a sexual assault to Safe Harbor, what does that process look like? And how is this process maybe different for an adult victim versus a child victim survivor?
Yeah, so if somebody is coming in and disclosing a sexual assault, the path that is taken is going to drastically depend on if it's an adult or a child. We are mandated reporters, and so if there's a child victim, it is our responsibility to report that crime. However, what we're going to do is try to work with the victim and the family to be able to report that themselves. We want to give as much autonomy as possible in this. So making that feel comfortable for them, explaining how that process is going to look, and then getting them connected to the right people to do that is the best option for us. If it's an adult, we're not mandated to tell anybody anything. So that's where our confidentiality comes into play. We have very strict confidentiality rules here. Even if we're working with a partner, if we do not have a release of information, we will not disclose any information. So if we're working with victim witness, like we've had conversations in the past because there's been a release, but now the release has expired. If they call, we're going to say we can't confirm or deny. We won't share information until a new release is signed, or at all if a release isn't wanted by the victim. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. In thinking about releases of information, can you kind of tell me like what does a typical release of information look like? How long is it good for? When does it expire? All of those fun things.
Yeah, again, confidentiality is one of the most important things here because of our role in this process. We're so separated from everybody else because we're not part of the legality part. And so we're like a safe space for people to share things that they might not want brought up into the court system. And so our releases of information are pretty lengthy, and they're very, very specific. So when we're working with somebody, let's say that they wanted us to help them stay up to date on court hearings. And so they have given us permission to talk to victim witness about upcoming court hearings. That's very specific. It will say just that, and then that is it. We will not be able to share how they're feeling about the court date or anything else.
Sure.
Just that very small portion of information is what we'll be able to talk about. These releases are good for 30 days at the most. People can make them shorter if they'd like to. They automatically expire after 30 days. They can be extended more easily than doing a new one, but 30 days because we don't want to be giving out any information that the victim survivor is not wanting to give out. And so they're very time limited to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and thank you for kind of explaining that a little bit in greater detail. I think that that's a really important aspect for our community at large to really have a good understanding of is that element of confidentiality and really our responsibility and our duty to our client, to that victim survivor in maintaining that confidentiality.
Yes.
So knowing that there are a number of community partners or other agencies that a victim survivor may need to access or interact with through the process of navigating systems, as advocates, how do we collaborate with our community partners or best serve clients? And you definitely unpacked that a little bit, but I'm just wondering if you can kind of go into a little bit more detail about kind of what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Sheboygan, we have what we call a SAART team, which is a sexual sexual assault response team that's been together for quite a few years now. The participation in it is amazing. The fact that our community partners care so much about the victims in our county and are willing to come together to try to do best practice and make sure that our victims aren't receiving any more harm through the system. It's great. And so we have that team approach in that way where we're working together to see how as a community we can best support victim survivors. But at the same time, we're all very separate and different organizations with different goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, without releases of information, we're not sharing information. That's not something that we do. That's not what other agencies do either. And so, even though we work together really well, we are very separate. There are definite boundaries between our services and what we're able to share with people. And so that, we take that very seriously, but we also take wanting to do the best we can for a victim survivor. And that's why we have this team that is dedicated to making sure that that's happening.
Perfect, thank you. The last question, or the final question that I have for you today is, in recognizing that victims and survivors of sexual assault have experienced a high degree of trauma, what does trauma-informed care or trauma-informed approach mean to you in your work?
Yeah, so that's a buzzword these days, right? We hear that floating around a lot, and really, what does that mean, right? In our work, it's everything. Trauma-informed care is everything that we do. So that is avoiding any of that further harm. So that means trying to make sure that a victim isn't repeating their story over and over and over again, right? That can be traumatizing again. It's meeting a person where they're at, right? My goals and what I think is right in the world is not somebody else's. They get to decide that. And so it's meeting them where they are at, where their goals lie, what they're able to do, right? And then empowering victims and survivors to live their best life. What does that look like to them? Letting them be able to think about that again, right? So many times with sexual assault, there's all of these other traumas, related to them and entwined in that. And they have not ever been able to look at the world that way, to dream about what their life could be. And so helping them kind of put that together and empowering them to be able to do that. And then, back to that safety, right? Addressing those safety needs, trying to figure out how we can get people to the safest that they can feel in this kind of trauma. That safety, it really gets ripped away. And so trying to work on ways to make them feel safe. It's listening, it's believing, right? People are not coming in and telling these things and making them up. That doesn't happen hardly ever, right? And so it's so important to be believing these people and their stories and what they've gone through. And then offering that support, but allowing them the autonomy to make their decisions, right? Allowing them to go at their own pace and to have this journey look like they want it to.
Yeah, and in part of your response, you had identified the kind of the myth of false reports, right? And in doing this work, we know that the number of false reports is less than 4%, right? And that's in alignment with all other major crime. So I think that's also another important awareness piece for our community to really have, is that that's what the statistics really identify. And the way that I think it's always kind of important to frame is, what if someone discloses to you and you don't believe them, right? And the harm that has then been caused to that victim survivor because you didn't believe them, right?
Yep.
So thank you so much for the conversation today. This is a really great element for our community and for our audience. So thank you to our audience for joining us as well. Please join us in the future to have these conversations with other community partners, with other agencies, as we continue our Sexual Assault Awareness Month Community Conversation Series. Thank you.
Thank you.